Writing is my favorite thing to do.
Have you heard about the Gateway to Publishing Conference and Convention? They'll have writing workshops, writing classes, and more. June 16th through 18th, 2017 at the Renaissance Airport Hotel in St. Louis, Missouri.
Cool! Where can I sign up?
Go right now to www.stlwritersguild.org and click on GatewayCon.
www.stlwritersguild.org and click on GatewayCon?
That's right. See you there.
Right Pack Radio, a podcast produced by Winding Trails Media for writers by writers.
Writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Right Pack.
Hello and welcome back to Right Pack Radio. I'm your host for today, Kathleen Kayembe. I'm filling in for David, who may or may not have been riddled with disease by something I did magically to him in his sleep. I like to write fantasy and horror. I also write romance under the pen name Kaseka and Vita. I have a short story coming out in Nightmare Magazine called You Will Always Have Family, a Triptych. It's out in March, which I believe this is airing in March, so...
This should be March the 19th?
March the... So you should check it out. And with me today...
my name is Jennifer Stolzer. I'm a children's book author and illustrator. My premiere fantasy novel, Threadcaster, is available online right now on Amazon.com. And if you're a St. Louisan, please join me at Main Street Books in St. Charles on March the 25th, which should be next week, I think? Depending on when this airs. But it's at Main Street Books in St. Charles, in historic St. Charles, on March the 25th from 2 to 5 p.m. And I just got my box of Threadcaster strings. So I have Cat's Cradle strings for anyone who buys a book there, and signings and cookies and all sorts of great stuff. It's going to be good times.
Can save a purple one for me.
You want a purple one? I'll put a pin in a purple one for you.
With us also today...
My name is George Soroy. I am the Vice President of the Missouri Writers Guild. Looking forward to seeing you all at the Missouri Writers Guild Annual Conference, May 5th through the 7th at the Holiday Inn Executive Center in Columbia, Missouri. It's going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to seeing all of you there. I also write science fiction for the young adult reader. My young adult novels, Excelsior and Ever Upward, Part 2 of the Excelsior Journey, will be launched through Aloris Publishing May and June 1st, 2017. My 5-part serial from Parts Unknown will be released as separate books very soon, actually. I want to say like in the next month or so. And if you are an audiobook fan, be warned that there will be up to about 10 different audiobooks coming out narrated by yours truly in 2017. Many more details to come.
Be warned.
Be warned.
They're going to be so impactful. You're going to need to sit down.
Exactly. I will be whispering sweet nothings in your ear for 7 hours.
Swoon-worthy. My name is Chanel Etienne, and I write stuff including science fiction and fantasy.
I'm Melanie Lucas.
She's also got the plague.
Yes, and yes, if we haven't figured it out, we do sometimes record more than one episode a day, so I still have this cold.
Well, all sickness aside, today we have a very special episode. We got a listener request. This request is from Tom Lindsay, who asked us what vital questions every writer should ask themselves about their story. He said, I'm sure each person in the roundtable will have unique questions that they always ask and answer according to their personal taste. It could be categorized into character, theme, setting, plot, concept, etc. Or it could be more general. So, how do you guys want to tackle this question? Should we go by topic or just talk the way we do?
Let's just talk.
Feeling a little bit casual over there, Chanel?
Yeah,
whatever. When you start off talking about sweet nothings, it's the only natural.
You can only go up from there.
Like, let's just really talk, guys.
It can only go down.
You know.
my.
Speaking of sweet nothings and going down,
I'm
George,
ashamed.
you had something to say.
Yes.
This is what happened.
Hi, Mom.
You're letting the erotica writer run the podcast. This is on you. Continue, please.
One of my things that I like to one of my questions that I like to throw around for myself is a basic what if. That's something that I'm sure that a lot of writers really kind of ask themselves in regards to plot or whatever. My personal favorite what if moment came when I was taking a walk on Amsterdam Avenue and around 77th Street back when I was a freshman in college in New York City. And a sudden thought popped into my head since I had just watched some WWF wrestling on Saturday morning before taking a walk and everything. And all of a sudden it hit me and I was just like, well, what if all of those over-the-top situations, all over-the-top characters and everything, what if they were all happening in real life? What exactly would happen there? And that little what if question, over 20 years later, eventually became the 5-part serial from Parts Unknown, which will be coming out in the next couple of months.
Well, I was thinking of this question in something of a different way, actually. I was thinking of it in terms of what we ask ourselves when writing a story to make it better. And the first thing I would say that I ask myself nowadays is character questions.
Absolutely.
One of the things that that I learned at Clarion from one of my teachers was he made this diagram that was a triangle, basically, for each of the 3 characters in the story. And he said, what does this character on this end of the triangle think of this one? What about the other one? And he said, like, you go around, and I realized that's something that I ask myself already about characters. How does this character feel about that one? How does that one feel about the first character? And how do they feel about the 3rd character, and the 4th, and the 5th, and so on?
I would need a dodecagon.
Like, because everybody's relationship is different, so I don't make the diagram, but instinctively I'm already asking myself, okay, for example, the story I'm writing right now, Reagan is talking to Thorin. How does he feel about Thorin? Nursing a secret crush. Thorin is talking to Reagan. How does he feel about Reagan? Thinks Reagan hates him back, and already hated Reagan like for years. So the things that they will say to one another are very different, and the way they will interpret what the other one says to them is very different because of how they feel about each other, which does not have to be the same thing.
I'm always an advocate for character. I think character drives any story. I think character is the hook that every story hangs on the wall with. Human beings want to have a relational experience with the story that they're hearing, the way that Neanderthals learned lessons back before written language was telling stories and using cautionary tales. And why don't we eat these berries? Well, it's because Jeff ate those berries, and you know what happened to him.
Damn it, Jeff.
Yeah,
Poor
Jeff.
Every society
Thanks for
needs a
taking
Jeff.
one for the team, Jeff.
We need a backup Jeff for when the first Jeff's too much.
That's Jeff with a Geoff.
Oh,
Alright.
Geoff.
I do the similar thing, like how do characters think, but I tend to take my characters, if I've moved past what you've said already, obviously who feels for what about what, and how do people feel about each other is the most important, because emotions are what drive human beings, most of the time. How it's relating to the audience is less important than how people relate within their universe, because as far as the book is concerned, the audience isn't there. But you can't forget about the audience too, which is kind of goes to you asking what do you ask yourself to make your book better? Because if left to my own devices, my characters will sit in a room and talk for 150 pages, and nothing will happen, but a lot of sass and a lot of jokes will happen, and I'll laugh my little butt off and enjoy myself, and then no one will ever read it, because nothing happens in the book. I tend to take each scene in terms of jobs, and each character in terms of jobs. Like, what is this character doing? What is his job? And if he's not doing his job, then what is that telling us? A great example, I'll bring up a character that I executed from my book that loyal listeners will recognize her name. Her name is Sharon. Sharon was a character in Threadcaster, and she was a huge pain in the ass and a thorn in my side. She was one of those characters that existed from draft 1, so it never occurred to me that she didn't need to be in the final draft. So I kept trying to find relevance in her. Like, what's something that she can do to make her presence required? And every time I gave her a job, I realized I'd taken that job from another character. Or it was the same job that someone that, in the future does, and I'm being repetitive. Or something like that. So I look at a scene and I say, okay, why, let's say it's a Sharon scene. Sharon was responsible for plucking our friends out of danger and transporting them to their next location. That was her job in the book. It's like, okay, so if Sharon doesn't do this job, who can do this job? And I realized Kat can do it her own goddamn self. So that was how I asked a question. What is she doing here? And can anyone else do the job without breaking character? That improved my book, because a draft without Sharon is a better draft. Die, Sharon.
Die, Sharon, die.
Sharon's gonna make... I've already decided to put her in one of the sequel books if I ever get to writing it. And when I do, she's going to become the most caustic and nasty character, because that's how I feel about her now.
Sharon must die.
Sharon must die.
I was having a moment when I talked about the character relationship diagram. I just want to say the teacher who told me about it was Andy Duncan, and he's wonderful.
Yeah.
But I'm also really exhausted. I've been a parent for 5 days now, and I don't know how to do it. So my brain is fried. Now other people should talk.
She's a parent because she's inherited someone else's children,
Yes.
not because she gave birth 5 days ago.
But I am a fiction writer, so I would totally write that kind of thing happening to somebody.
I need to. This is a moment where I really need to give credit to all the really great content editors out there, because part of your job is to ask these kinds of questions to your author, because one of the things that I've had experience with when I was writing both Excelsior and Ever Upward, mainly with the first Excelsior book, was basically coming to grips with the fact that I had a good story, I had some good characters and everything, but I had a white background that they were working on. And it was the content editors, my wonderful content editor, Jerry Engeller, who made a point to ask me every single question about the world, about the people around them, about, their place in that world. Every little detail about it, what this race is doing, what this race is doing, and basically forced me to create a mythology in a way that I never saw until it was brought to my attention. So the fact that she kept on asking question after question after question, it was just making everything richer and better and more detailed, to a point where I am so immensely proud of this work that's going to be coming back out this May, and it's so far away from what it was when I wrote that first draft in 2008.
I just want to give a plug to writing communities, because writers don't write in vacuums, and even if you don't ask yourself the right questions, somebody else probably will. Chanel?
Skip me.
I think I have the opposite problem. Maybe this is I like building universes. And my problem is sometimes I have a few great universes that there's no story, because I was like, okay, what happens? You know, it's like, yeah, I can put some characters in there, but it's like, okay, great setup, great universe. Now I have to wait for a story to come along. But I was just telling you about a plot problem I'm having, and no, my universe is fully developed. I know what all the other races are doing. But this
I was jealous when you were going through all of that. I was just like,
and
that's so rich.
Questions, I'll have more answers.
Yeah.
That's not my
This was
problem.
before the episode started. You're not crazy. You literally heard none of it, guys. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's true. We need to keep in mind that the recording button wasn't hit yet.
Yes.
There was a great bit. There was a great bit actually in a conversation between J.K. Rowling and Steve Kloves, who did 7 out of the 8 screenplays for the Harry Potter films, and he had like a sudden burst of inspiration to ask JK what the uses for Dragon's Blood were. And within a few minutes, she wrote back like oven cleaner and like a whole bunch of other things. So the fact that she was so in tune with that universe, like that's something that I long to be in. I'm 2 books in, and there are still like details that I'm sure that I'm still going to be eventually digging up through this. And I wouldn't have gotten anywhere near that if my content editor hadn't kept pushing me to answer these kinds of questions. And the beautiful thing about those kinds of questions, nothing's wrong when you give an answer. You're not giving a wrong answer. Like whatever you feel works for that universe and everything, you just got to do something. You got to create those kinds of details.
So it seems like we've segued from characters to universe, so I will change what I was going to say.
Oh, wait. No.
Oh, you want to come back now? Come on, come back. It's your turn.
Okay. So
I'll say my character thing when you're done.
Yeah, going back to characters. One of the things that I kind of have to ask myself, especially with regards to like what Jim was saying, is this character absolutely necessary? Basically, is in addition to are they necessary? Why should I care? Like, why should I care about this person? Do they have any sort of quality that I can latch onto as not just a writer, but as a reader? Like I try to think of it from a reader's perspective. What would I take away from this character? Why should I even care about them? If I can't answer the question as to why the reader should care about the character, they are probably better off not being there.
That's such a hard question to ask. I never asked myself that, because then I would second guess everything and be like, I don't know.
I mean, you don't have to worry. You care about stuff more than a lot of people I know.
I figured that's true. Probably the case.
You care very hard in things.
I love my characters and stories. Speaking of loving my characters and stories, I'm not always very nice to them. Something that I find fascinating as a writer is what people believe to be true versus what is actually true. And this was long before alt facts became a thing that people said, you guys. Like, this is 10 years in the making. So in the novel Jinx that I'm still not done writing, one of the questions I ask myself all the time is, what does this character think is going on? Is that actually what's going on? No. But they're going to spread that misinformation because they believe it with all their heart, and it's going to mess things up. That is so much fun for me. So much fun. So, dealing with what a character knows, like if you're a gamer, a role-playing gamer, what's player knowledge and what's character knowledge? What do you, the author, know, and what does the character know, and where that is different? What can you imply to the reader about maybe this character being wrong without giving anything away?
Yeah, do you want to? Okay, this actually goes to the questions I'm struggling with. It's when I go to the actual plot point. What I'm kind of going in the story is I try and come up with a fully developed world, put real people in it, and then see where the story goes. By the way, that doesn't actually work because I need places for them to be heading towards, but okay.
Yeah.
But,
not Mordor.
Yeah. What?
Not Mordor.
No, not Mordor. But, no, but my 2 questions that I try and know the answer for every character. And even any character that's important enough to actually have a line. So even minor characters, what do they know and what do they want? Now, Miss the Waiter, they just want to take the order sometimes. But, this will dictate their actions and their reactions.
And also, like one thing to keep in mind when it comes to what information you want your character to give and what information you want the reader to know, make sure that you're not body hopping. Head hopping when you're doing this.
Unless you're writing omnipotent, then you can just go right ahead.
But even that, like it can be it can be kind of draining when you have like a conversation between 2 people, and you're saying like let's go down to the store. Said this person who was so confident that he was gonna walk down to the store without a problem. And then the friend says, no, I don't want to go down to the store, afraid that something will happen if they go down to the store. It was just like, you're giving away too much information and you're you're wasting a good opportunity to kind of hold something back with your character. If best thing to keep in mind is that when you're having a conversation with a friend or anyone really, just remember you don't know what's going on inside their head. So make sure that your character that you're speaking through doesn't know either.
Yeah, limiting what your character knows and being sure that you faithfully portray what that character would be feeling and thinking and think they understand in a situation is really important. We've mentioned audience a few times now, though. I'd like to go into that a little bit. Chanel's giving me the dirtiest look that ever dirty looked. And now she's laughing, so thankfully she's not looking at me like that anymore. But I like to...
But you don't know what's going on inside her head.
No.
She's giving that laugh. She could be thinking of a joke that she heard a few minutes ago.
The joke is me.
We're plotting your demise.
So I think about audience when I'm writing. Initially, I don't think about it so much during the first draft. I try not to, but lately I've started to as well. Like, what is the audience's understanding of the situation? How do I want the audience to feel about this character? Do I want them to like this character or dislike this character? Because that'll change how I describe that character, for example. And if I want them to, in the story that I mentioned with Reagan and Thorin, there's a character in there who I want the audience to dislike. I want them to think he is a sexist jerk who is way too rich for his own good and also way too stupid. So he does things that I think would fit his type of character, but I make sure to highlight the things that will give the audience those impressions of him, so that not only do the characters that the audience is kind of riding along the back of see him that way, but then the audience sees that character the same way as well. I also try and think about what I want the audience to feel at the end of a story, and I try and write to that. So I'll tailor my descriptions, I'll tailor what I write, I'll tailor what details I put in and leave out, so that the emotional impact of the story hits where I want it to when I write. Okay, so... Oh no.
Sorry, I can't control my face sometimes.
It's great.
So here's my thing. You came in talking about audience, and I immediately had to cringe, just because this is a pet peeve of mine, and some people are okay with this sort of thing. In my opinion, your audience should be considered in the telling of the story, not in the actions of the story itself.
Yes.
So that is a huge pet peeve of mine, when people actually write, sort of tailor the story itself to the reactions of their audience. It bothers me on a level that is surreal. So when you're talking about considering your audience, I think I'm going to throw out this little disclaimer here. Someone correct me if they think I'm wrong. That if you're going to consider your audience, consider, like Kathleen said, that the story you're telling is getting across to the audience the way you want it to. And don't consider your audience in the way of, oh, I should torture this character because my audience will think it's terrible. That drives me nuts. Game of Thrones. Yeah. Consider your audience in the way that you tell the story, not in the shaping of the story itself.
Yeah. So I kind of want to... Oh, Jen, do you have something to say about it?
I can just add an example to what Chanel said. Sure. My example is Darth Vader. There are 3 Darth Vaders in the Star Wars franchise. In the original trilogy, Darth Vader was a part of his universe. He was just a small... one cog in a large machine. He was an interesting, attention-getting cog that you wanted to know more about and who stuck out from the crowd. But that's good. That's character design. But he was a part of his universe. In the prequel trilogy, he was important to the audience. The audience cared more about him getting in that suit than anyone in the universe did. And that is part of the reason why the prequel trilogy is not the example of good writing that the original trilogy is. It's because the prequel trilogy was really concerned with the audience and everything outside of the movies. The inside of the movies was a vehicle to sell toys and T-shirts and get butts and seats. Then the third Darth Vader is in Rogue One, and that Darth Vader is the writer's Darth Vader. He wasn't in the movie. It wasn't in his own universe. He was in there, but he was doing what the author, what the writers and the makers all wanted him to do because he was so cool and they liked him. And the audience, there are chunks of that movie that is specifically catered to. We know you saw the first movies and we like them too. And inclusion of a couple droids, some lines, some throwaway characters that are in there for no other reason, just because the guys who wrote it thought it was really fun to include them. And to a certain extent, that's fine because you want to enjoy your stuff. But Darth Vader was in the original trilogy. He was a crippled, angry man in a tin can, and everyone made fun of him. And he was powerful to the point that the Emperor trusted him, but he was not a god among men like in Rogue One or the Chosen One like in the prequels. He was one guy who was strong in the Force in the dark side, and the Emperor was strong in the Force in the dark side. He didn't have a whole lot of other people who was there with him, so they were instruments of it, and it just so happened to be him in that place in that time, and that's what he turned into. He was more ingrained in his universe in the original trilogy when we were being introduced to him than he was when the audience or the writer became influences on his character.
It's like he was the product. It was like he was the product of being who he was,
yes.
Which led to, what he would wind up being, especially in Rogue One.
Yeah,
because those little moments, that they had, they were solid moments, especially that second one. There will be no spoilers there. Just go see it. You'll enjoy it.
You'll enjoy it because you think that Star Wars is cool too.
Yeah.
So does everybody who made Rogue One.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's why I'm looking forward to seeing what the next few films holds, because it's all done by people who also think Star Wars is cool and want to bring that out.
I also think Donnie Yen is cool. That is why I went to see Rogue One. I
Yes.
have no regrets.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. His character. Anyway, so universe guys.
Oh boy.
I want to bring up how I first learned that universe questions were a thing that I needed to ask myself.
Ha.
Okay. So I was in April Smithy, and George Claxton gave a talk at ConBus, the science fiction fantasy convention at Smith every year. And George is a marvelous person, very smart, very worldly wise. And he gave this talk, and he was talking about how people don't often think when they're making their fantasy or sci-fi worlds about how government works, other countries, how money works, how religion works. You'd be hard-pressed not to find these things everywhere in our own world. But fantasy worlds, for example, seem to be bereft of God unless they're literally trying to fulfill a prophecy or something. But there's no religion, there's little diversity in what people believe. There's a great Babylon 5 episode.
There's
There's a great Babylon 5 episode that I want Jen to explain better than me about Earth's religion.
It was about everyone's religion.
Yes.
A very, very small way about Jakar's religion because he was concerned about being assassinated in that episode. But something that J. Michael Straczynski and the other writers of Babylon 5 really wanted to do was to tell their story, but have it rooted in real world. So when it came to, they looked at all the different races' religions and how they all worked within their culture. And then he looked at Earth and said, Earth doesn't have one religion. It has a lot of religions. And then let all of those religions stand up and be equal party to the proceedings.
It was amazing. There was a line that was going off screen, even when the camera panned to see more of the line.
Also, another element that needs to be kind of taken into consideration when you're doing your, universe building is communication. Because I'm not sure if anyone else here saw Arrival. But, that's all about how, the struggle for different beings, everything to communicate with each other, and it's a really very powerful movie that I would strongly recommend. And the really interesting part of it was really kind of figuring out how they were going to, like human and alien were going to actually communicate with each other, like what methods they were going to use. I'm not going to go into detail because I only saw it last night, and I definitely need to watch it again so I can really kind of get a stronger grip on how they came to the conclusions they did. But that's something to really kind of keep in mind. We've gone past the era of low budget science fiction, aka like say Star Trek the original series, where you can just stick, just go ahead and put some makeup on someone's forehead, and yet they're speaking perfect English. There's
still a lot of sci-fi like that.
Yeah, it's easier in general.
It is. It's definitely easier in general, but at the same time, it's just like at some point there has to, there's always going to be that moment before there is that universal translator, that's allowing them to communicate with each other.
Oh my gosh, you reminded me of a great Green Lantern episode, an animated Green Lantern episode. Green Lantern Corps is basically Men in Black, but from every galaxy ever. And 3 members of the Green Lantern Corps from different galaxies, suddenly, during the episode, their translators go on the fritz. And then they're gone. And these people, who are used to talking to each other and conveying orders to one another and working like a well-synchronized machine, a well-oiled machine, suddenly cannot communicate beyond hand gestures. And they're lost in an alien world trying to make their ship work again so they can leave. And it's beautiful watching how people communicate when they can't communicate. And I think that was one of the great things about Ted Chiang's short story, Story of Your Life, which is what Arrival is based on. How do you communicate when you can't communicate, and how do you build a foundation like that? Mm-hmm. Different languages and stories are great. I don't make languages, but thinking about who would be able to actually talk to who, and whether or not they get along based on their cultures is fun.
Let's get back to the questions topic.
Yeah. So sorry, I brought that up because I like figuring out how characters relate to one another. That's at the base of it. It goes from character to the larger community to the culture. So when making different groups of people, I try and figure out if they can communicate, how they would communicate, and whether or not they would communicate well or wisely.
Okay, you brought it back to a question.
Yes. Oh, I can always bring it back. So, Tom Lindsay mentioned character and theme and setting and plot and concept. We've talked about some of those, but not really theme or plot. How do you guys, are there plot questions you ask yourselves?
Oh, jeez.
How do you figure out what comes next, for example?
I find theme usually takes care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
If I go back through, it's like, oh, wait a minute, this keeps, it's like that, once the plot and the characters are developed, often there is a theme.
Mm-hmm.
I know some authors, they start out with a theme, and the whole story is, and the really good authors, like they're exploring this theme without hitting you over the head with it. But I was reading a book, I think the name of the book was called Cryoburn. It was by Lois McMaster's Bourgeois.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
What?
Wow.
I'm impressed you pulled that name out.
That's funny too. Not that I don't have it in my head, it's just that I think I pronounced it more or less correctly. But point is, I suspect she wrote this book in response to her parents dying. And by the way, given her age, I would be amazed if she still has both of her parents alive. They would have to be very long-lived at this point. But, because she has been writing the Miles Verkoskin series for many, many years. But in this book, the whole universe, they have this thing where instead of people dying, or rather, but right before they died, preferably, they went into cryo suspension.
Preferably.
Well, yeah, preferably right before you die rather than right after you die. But right after you die would work too. And the idea is in the future they figure out how to fix whatever's wrong with you, and then you wake up and you live some more. Well, that can take years and decades. And so it's like, so most of the population is in the suspended animation. But they're not permanently dead, but they're not really alive, and people are being woken up. But like every year, the equivalent of millions of people are being put into cryo suspension, and like maybe 10% of them, 20% of them are coming out. So it's, what's the meaning of death if it's reversible and it's never really permanent? And, if your parents die and they're gone, well, how is that different than if they're gone and frozen and they might be back when you're a grandparent? But then again, maybe not. They might really be dead. And what does that really mean when they've been the same way for 30 years?
Reminds me a bit of a cat I once heard about.
Yeah, I was gonna say Schrodinger's parents.
One thing you want to be careful about, though, regarding like theme and plot, is that you really want that theme to kind of come out organically through the plot. You don't want to try to wrap a plot around a theme, because then all of a sudden you're just getting on a soapbox.
Yeah, and this story actually did it very well. They had apparently people that were frozen still have the right to vote. They have their votes to proxies. So there was a scandal with selling the proxies, and it turns out about a few million of them that were frozen were actually permanently dead. And there was it was based on the mortgage scandal. It was very funny.
So you said it was called Cryo. What was it?
Cryo Burn.
Cryo Burn. Okay.
That was like way late in the series, by the way. But it's the Miles Verkosigan series.
Nice.
The phrase you just said that it gets on a soapbox. I don't remember whose quote it was, but somebody is quoted saying that if you're writing a story to promote an agenda, just write a nonfiction. Write an essay about it, because it's not going to be fun for the reader to read a story that's mostly just you preaching at them about some ideology.
I think Tarantino actually said something like that.
Yeah.
He said it in a Premiere Magazine interview. Like back when he had back when Reservoir Dogs had just come out. He was saying that like if you're writing a story to say war is bad, just say war is bad. Just do that.
You write an interesting story that has war is bad in it as an element.
Right.
But the story and the characters need to stand on their own.
Yeah.
So there's a question you can ask yourself when you're asking your story: is my theme, is my plot, is my bias overshadowing everything else, and do I need to turn it down a notch?
Mm-hmm.
That's what gets in the way of a lot of otherwise good devotional literature.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The theme gets in the way.
Yeah.
I was going to bring that to tropes, actually.
Tropes. I love tropes.
Because I recently went on a Twitter rant about the portrayal of gay quote-unquote romance when I was growing up, and how abysmal it was. Mm-hmm. The trope was basically, gay person dies so straight people feel bad about being mean to gay people. That's kind of how it worked.
Oh, like Rent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I was just going to say that.
Angel is literally the angel that is taken from everybody because we're mean to gay people. Pretty much. Mm-hmm. That is exactly what Angel's character is. Angel is a message character, and I hate those. And so something that I've started asking myself about certain characters is this character too perfect? Is this a message character? Mm-hmm. Am I making this a message and not an actual character? Is this a trope I really want to be using right now, or will I want to hurt myself later when it's too late to take this character back?
Mm-hmm.
If the answer is yes, you will wish you would hurt yourself now so you change the character, but whatever. If I want to not have done that, I change the character. I will want to not have made this character a trope. I will want to not have had this character's wife and daughter kidnapped so he goes for revenge. Mm-hmm. I would like to have the husband kidnapped and the wife and daughter go out for revenge. That's a fun idea to me. Wife and daughter duo. I love mother-daughter stories. Why can't we do that?
That's a good trope.
Yes. Yes.
Just real quick, what's your Twitter handle? So that way others can see this rant
Can
if
follow your
they
rants.
so chose.
Oh, my
It's probably pretty deep in there by now.
Yeah, probably.
My Twitter handle is MKKAYEMBE. That's my first name and my last name, MK Kayembe. And something that has become more obvious to me since going to Clarion and having that experience where a person said, I have been in this romance trope situation and it is scary. It is not romantic. That's made me question a lot of the tropes that I've been using that I thought were just fine.
Mm-hmm.
So since then I've tried to be more cognizant of whether I am using a trope and how I am using it and whether it is actually harmful. Because when I was growing up, all the gay stories, the gay romances, the things that were called romances, ended unhappily for gay people. And because there was no competing narrative, it basically said, if you're gay and you try and be gay, like live and love that way, you are going to die. Probably horribly and probably young. You'll be unhappy though. And so that made me kind of examine what I do in my writing a lot closer than I did before. Like, oh my gosh, sorry. We were visited by a plague-ridden person. Do you guys find that you write to tropes, though? Do you have to watch what you do?
Threadcaster is a collection of all of my favorite tropes. I don't know what you're talking about. I put everything I love in that thing. And, I'm aware it's a little bit tropey, but a trope is a trope because it's used very often. So if you can find a new and creative way to do it, then it's fine.
I find that if you, I'm sorry, got distracted.
So what are the tropes that you used in Threadcaster?
So spoilers or not spoilers?
Sorry. I thought you needed time to think.
No, you're fine.
She was looking at the ghost of David, who is definitely not dead because I definitely did not kill him with plague.
In terms of tropes, I find like it's one of those your mileage may vary things because I honestly think that if you take a trope and consider it seriously, consider why it became a trope in the first place, and really sort of dig into that idea and give it an actual reason for being, instead of just tossing it out there, assuming that everyone's going to take it at face value, you get much more use out of it. You get more mileage out of it. So I think that tropes can have a point and a place. You just have to use them carefully.
I think that's pretty accurate.
I've found certain tropes to be a good point of familiarity for if you're introducing whole new characters, whole new situations, and everything, but you use a template that is well known, like say the hero's journey template. The reader is going to, or the viewer, like whatever form of media you're using to tell the story, they're going to be invested in everything because they're familiar with what's to come. The fun part about it is like they have a whole new kind of character and a whole new situation to introduce themselves to, but they have a map already kind of, to kind of guide them along the way. That was, like I have made no apologies that Excelsior uses the hero's journey template pretty solidly. But at the same time, yes, it's been used in many different ways, but not by me. This was my take on it. So that, like once I kind of committed myself to that without, trying to discourage myself from using that, saying that, oh, it's, so cliche to use this. I was like, I'm telling this story in this way. So let's go and see where it takes me.
I think I read on Twitter somebody was saying that they want to like save the mentor because in the hero's journey the mentor often dies and then the hero continues on their own and that's how they become strong. And someone was like, why does the mentor always have to die? Why can't they just go live their own life and let the hero do their thing and just sing
Because we
about the
can't
nest.
tie up any loose ends. You can't leave people just out there somewhere.
Living.
To get back to Star
everyone.
Wars.
Make sure they all fit in their little egg crate carton.
But see, that's like questioning a trope. I think that's a really important thing to do as a writer, whether you use them or not.
I'm countering because I'm trying to make a joke about how stupid it is.
to get back to Star Wars, just for a brief moment. In the earlier drafts, Obi-Wan Kenobi survives until the end. It's all the way through.
The earlier drafts are really odd, though.
Yes, they are. But
if the audience wants to look at a great representation of the first rough drafts of Star Wars, there's a comic series out.
Yep.
What's the name of the comic series?
The Star Wars.
The Star Wars.
Yep.
And someone took the original script ideas and comicked them out.
Yeah.
And they are stupid, but that's great. It's really fun to see the first draft versus the final draft. It's a learning experience, so you can see the first draft of something and what it would look like if it hadn't gone through revision versus where it ends up when it's been very well revised and is now beloved by millions and millions of people.
Right. And when Lucas got pretty far into it, Kenobi was actually at the Rebel base at Yavin and everything, with Princess Leia and the other command leaders of the Alliance, just watching the attack. So there really wasn't anything for him to do.
Mm-hmm.
So once he put that element in, all of a sudden that opened up literally a whole new world of things. Because so he disappears. What happens to him now? And it created a whole new question and an answer that led to a whole huge element of Jedi lore, which
Ghost.
remains to this day. Yeah, the Force Ghost. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect segue into something that we haven't really talked about before, revision questions that we ask ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember if it was this episode or the episode that we recorded previous to this that definitely was not this week or today, where Jen mentioned that certain, if her stories were up to her half the time, people would be sitting around laughing, snarking.
I think that was earlier today.
Okay,
That
good.
was earlier today.
Yes. Well, Jen even has terms for those sorts of things, like
I
the
do.
bamboo trap.
The bamboo trap scene in the exposition couch.
Exposition couch. Yeah.
So, there are things that Jen clearly recognizes.
And a case of the plots.
Mm-hmm.
Which is when people get really... They're just so full of plot development information that they turn and barf it on their neighbor.
Oh, gosh.
So you have these things that you do a lot. I have things that I've noticed that I do too much that I try and stop in revision.
What's the names of those?
I don't have cool names for them.
You should come up with cool names for them. We'll write a book together.
Oh my gosh, do this.
Details? I don't even know. I pay a lot of attention to what details I put into things, and I tweak and change those in revision to go more toward the emotional content of the story, the emotional flow that I want.
Mm-hmm.
So I change a lot of details and a lot of sentence edits for flow, and I make myself stop rhyming.
Rhyming?
Rhyming.
You write very lyrically.
Yes, I do.
Oh, jeez. Well, you mentioned, what was it? Where you turn around and vomit on your neighbor?
It's
That's
the
the
case,
part that...
having a case of the plots.
Yes,
and there's such a thing as a plot sneeze as well. An episode of a good example of a plot sneeze, when one has a mild case of the plots and it's just a plot sneeze. At the beginning of Big Hero 6, which is a movie that Disney put out a couple years ago, the protagonist hero, his brother comes to pick him up after he's been illegally robot fighting in a back alley. And so they get on a bike and they're riding away, and his brother turns over his shoulder and says, "For somebody who was so smart that he graduated high school at 14, you think that you would be smarter, you wouldn't do these kind of things." And it's like, plot! Okay.
Glad I got
So it was a little bit of backstory. It wasn't a vomit, it was a sneeze. It was just a moment. Where he had a case of the plots, you just went, okay, I'm better now.
That's actually exactly what I was thinking about when we were talking about universe questions. Because I find that some people, they get so delightfully caught up, and I say delightfully, in the details of their universe that it just kind of comes spewing out of them in all orifices. And I'm just like... We were having a great little party over here, trucking along, and then you just stopped everything and did this giant info dump of all the things that you find really cool about this place you created, which is awesome. But no info dumps, please.
Yep.
There's one thing that I found that works with info dumps, and this is something that I got to give a whole bunch of credit to James Cameron for. Is if you're going to do info dumps, then keep it moving,
Yes.
because that's one of the great elements of the original Terminator was Kyle Reese in the car with Sarah Connor, screaming in the passenger seat and everything, and he's literally barfing the whole plot. Why, who this is that's chasing them, why he is chasing them, and what is supposedly to come for this whole future. All of that takes place during a car chase, so you have the kinetic action and everything that you're caught up in. And you're also learning at the same time. So it's one thing that definitely helps in that sense.
That is multitasking.
That is big time
prevents-
multitasking.
That
Yes.
is what prevents that scene from becoming an exposition couch scene, which is what Chanel mentioned.
Yes.
It's called an exposition couch because you sit down and talk about lore.
Mm-hmm.
Which is different from a bamboo trap scene, which is when you fall into a pit of sharpened sticks and talk about what everyone already knows.
I love these. I love these, by the way.
Multitasking, the exposition couch also comes from the Star Wars prequels, but specifically it comes from a book called Haven that had a literal couch where they sat down, and the two romance couple, they sat down, one's a vampire, and the girl turns to him and says, "So tell me about your culture." And then he talks for 12 pages about his culture while they're sitting on this couch. And then they showed up to the couch again later, and I'm like, please don't. Because it's in his apartment, and when they're not at school, because it's like vampire Hogwarts. When they're not at school, they go to his loft apartment in New York, and they sit down and talk about lore on this couch. So it's spring break, and they go back to his apartment. I'm like, don't sit on the couch.
It would actually be a really cool writing exercise to just gather up every single cliche that you possibly can get and everything, and see if you can contain them all into one story.
Well, they
and see what
literally
happens.
sat down on the couch.
Yeah.
That's a fun exercise to do, actually. Write as horribly as you can.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, I've lost my train of thought.
No, but this, related to that, brings up a good question. When you have a fantasy world that you've made up, that is complex and has all these things, how do you, let's say you've written Tolkien. Let's say you've written Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
Oh boy.
Awesome. You don't want a case of the plots. You don't want to use a prologue. But you want people to understand what's going on. Exactly. How do you do that?
It's a show don't tell scenario.
Yeah.
Tolkien did a good job because he took us to places. He described a lot about the culture of the dwarves by taking us to
The dwarves.
to the mines of Moria and looking at how things were built in the large chambers, and we understand. We explained the chambers were for everyone to gather together because they're a strongly knit community, and we all work together to build this thing. And then we run into the room full of corpses and we read out of a book to see what happened to the people there, and it's scary because we're anticipating the fact that it's dangerous. And we explore so much about dwarf culture without having to turn all the way back to the appendix in the back of The Return of the King and read 50 pages about it, which
But
is
the
in there
appendix
if you
was
want
there?
to. If you want to read 50 pages about dwarf culture, it's right there. And if you want to read even more about dwarf culture, there's a thing called the Silmarillion.
Jen, I'm glad you mentioned show don't tell, because one of the things that I find that I do sometimes in stories, more often than I would like or than I should, is I will have characters discuss another character, and they will talk about what kind of person they are, but then you won't necessarily see that person being that kind of person. So
There's a term for that.
What is the term?
The term is the smartest kid in the glade.
Oh. What is that referencing, Jen?
The Maze Runner, in which we're introduced to Thomas, the main character, by being told that he's the smartest kid in the glade, and he proceeds to not show it anytime.
So
That's called an attribute. What is that? Attribute. It's something that we are told the character has this trait, but they never display it.
Yeah.
There's something called that. Something trait.
If you know it, type it in the comments, guys.
Yeah.
'cause
Yeah.
we're
I
gonna
mostly
be-
call it smartest kid in the glade because every time Thomas
Yeah.
did something stupid, I went, smartest kid in the glade.
In the story that I mentioned earlier, Reagan hates a group of people, and I realized after he talked about hating this group of people I hadn't put in scenes where you show why they are such a hateful group of people, why they're so fun to hate, why they're perfect for not ever wanting to be like. So I started putting those scenes in, and it made the story better. It basically backed up what my characters said and thought about the world, but it also gave character moments that wouldn't have been there before.
That actually helps with something else, because it helps you with figure out if your narrator is trustworthy. Mm-hmm. Your source of information may be biased. They may be incorrect, or they may be lying.
Mm-hmm. I love playing with that.
I
As
love
mentioned before.
Love it.
Mm-hmm. Does the narrator know they're untrustworthy?
Yes, I love playing with that too.
So we're about out of time. Should we do final thoughts? Are there any questions that you can't write a story before you've asked?
How about why?
Why?
Yes.
Why what?
Why are you writing the story?
That's
That's what you ask yourself. Apparently Melanie doesn't ask herself that question.
Why the author is? No.
No, I mean why are you writing your story? Before you sit down to write your story, why is this the story you want to write? Why are you prioritizing this over all the other ideas that you have?
Because it sounds fun, and I made an agreement with the story that it was getting written today.
Well, that's good enough.
Mm-hmm. Which is why Jinx still isn't finished, but is still definitely on the docket.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Crickets.
Right.
I wanted to write Excelsior just because he was the character that I felt I knew the most out of the whole universe that I created, and I felt that he would be the perfect introduction to that universe.
I was given a challenge to write a story for someone, and even though I backed out of the challenge, I had already committed to writing the story. And so I was going to write the story, and I am writing the story. Also, it's fun knowing what's going to happen and making everything horrible before it does. Really, really heartbreakingly horrible. It's great.
That doesn't sound fun at all.
I'm a good person.
I don't know if this is just something. This is something I've been toying with. It's not something that I've done in practice yet, but it's an idea I'm working with. It's about the idea of stakes. I think it's kind of came because of one of the podcasts that we recorded a minute ago. It's just what is my ceiling for this particular work? Like, on what scale am I willing to have things happen? Is this a specifically person-to-person consequence type thing? Is this going to affect a group of people? Is this going to affect a city? Is this going to affect the world? On what scale am I trying to operate here? And especially considering like universe building, I like to know how far and how wide I'm willing to stretch my fingers, because like writing something that encompasses the entire world requires a bit more prep work. So that's something that I'm toying with right now as a question.
Chanel's got a cat familiar.
Feeling very interested.
Just thinking about the scope and scale of the way I'm writing and how much that will affect the actual story itself.
This is a question that I don't ask myself until I've already started writing the story. But it's really important for me because I have ADD and I love writing stories, but I don't like commitment all the time. When I've started a story and it seems like it's about to get to be a serious relationship between me and the story, I ask myself, honestly, do I want to commit to writing the rest of this thing? Because this thing is not going to be done in a day. And if I decide, yes, I am going to write the rest of this story, then it gets written. But if I decide, no, I did the part that I wanted, I did the fun part, then I'm like, okay, it's okay to put this down now. You can look at it again later if you somehow decide you want to change your opinion, but for now, I've done the writing, and I'm good.
And on that note,
yes, on that note, thank you all for listening. Have a great week writing, and we'll see you next time on Right Pack Radio.
Did you know that Right Pack Radio has an international audience? How would you like to reach that audience in regards to your books, your book services, your author services, or more? Go to www.windingtrailsmedia.com and look under advertising for more information. If you don't have a script, that's not a problem. We will be happy to work with you. Once again, go to www.windingtrailsmedia.com for more information.
The new theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her.